and welcome to the Game Changers podcast, where you'll hear from trailblazing women in sport who are doing so much to drive change and challenge the status quo for women and girls across society. I'm Sue Anstis, and I'd like to start by thanking our partners, Sport England, who support the Game Changers through a National Lottery Award. Today, I'm talking to Donna Fraser, a superb international athlete who now specialises in equality, diversity and inclusion in sport. Donna competed at 4 Olympic Games and won medals at World and European Championships and the Commonwealth Games. She reluctantly retired from athletics in 2009 after a breast cancer diagnosis, but went on to become UK athletics' first equality, diversity and engagement lead, working to champion ethnically diverse communities and inclusivity at all levels of the sport. Following a role as D&I Lead for Birmingham 2022, it was recently announced that Donna's been appointed as the first Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion for the Professional Cricketers Association. An incredible sportswoman who's gone on to deliver such powerful work around inclusion, is little wonder that Donna was awarded an OBE in the 2020 New Year's Honours List. And if that wasn't enough, Donna, you've just run the London Marathon after saying you never would. Tell us about that experience.
Hi, Sue. Yeah, and it most certainly was an experience. My feet, if you could see me now, I've actually got a peppermint and tea tree sock thing going on my feet at the moment. It was agony, absolute agony. But the reason why I was doing it is what kept me going, to be honest.
And I'm assuming that the training mindset and physical training was very, very different for that you've done in the past. So how did you find that?
Absolutely. I'm very much used to getting from A to B as quickly as possible. And that's not the case. This is most certainly that term we use. This is a marathon, not a sprint, Donna. And I was constantly reminding myself of that in training. I downloaded a beginner's program just to help me get through it. And in all honesty, I thought, this is not too bad. But then as the weeks progressed, the mileage increased and I was getting more and more tired. My feet were hurting more and more. I was aching more and more. But it was definitely a journey that tested my resilience and my mindset, both as an athlete and as an individual as well.
And you're obviously very competitive historically, but did you find that hard not that you were going to win it, but to be the fastest, a different approach this time?
I gave myself a good talking to when I started the program. I was like, Donna, you cannot be competitive in this. Otherwise, you will just fail miserably. You won't finish. So I listened to my own words and absolutely just did what I could and just wanted to get through the finish line, no matter how I did it, whether it was on my knees, but just finish it. And the time didn't matter. And I didn't set a time goal for myself because I think that would have definitely set the hairs going and thinking, right, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, but I didn't.
But I ran the London Marathon actually just once back in 2001, and I think losing my toenails was the most shocking part. So I'm not sure what those socks are doing for your feet, if they're helping.
Honestly, again, respect to any distance runner. Not that I disrespected them before, but all those elements of wearing the right trainers, even the right kit, drinking, taking on fluids, all of that is not as straightforward as it looks.
And you were running with the Her Spirit team, who had just completed an awesome Lakes to London challenge. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Her Spirit, they're an amazing organisation. Holly and Mel have done a tremendous job at trying to highlight the importance of activity for women, no matter what it is. It's just getting out there and moving. And they've got yoga on their app. They've got athletics, running, everything you can possibly think of. And you cannot believe the challenge that they put to me. Well, I wasn't doing their first bit. They swam 5K in Lake Windermere and then cycled down to London to meet me for the marathon. Crazy. I couldn't complain. I felt like a fraud, to be honest.
Just doing a marathon, yeah.
Exactly. So I was like, wow. I mean, they're amazing. What they do, their commitment, their drive, they're everything that you'd want to be, and they're great role models.
And they've raised, I think last looked, it was over £70,000 that they've raised for breast cancer now. So I'll put a link in the show notes for the podcast too, because I know they've done an amazing job there. How much is running still a part of your life generally? Not marathons necessarily, but just running.
Definitely not at all. I promised myself when I retired that I wouldn't step foot on a track because I know what I'm like. It will draw me back in. So I've stayed away on purpose, but I do go out for the odd run. And when I say the odd run, it's 15 minutes, not 5 hours.
And your competitive distance, as you say, was a little bit shorter at 200 and 400 metres. So taking us back to the start, where did athletics start for you?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, we're going way back now. I started running, I think, from the minute I was born. My parents say to me it was really difficult to keep me still. The minute I could walk, I ran everywhere. And my primary school was just amazing. I went to an all-girls primary school, which is extremely rare now, and had amazing female role models to look up to. All of the teachers were female. So I didn't know anything different. I was always surrounded by strong women. And my primary school teacher recognised the talent in me. We're a sporting family anyway. My family loved cricket, and it's quite ironic that I'll be working in cricket. My sister was a track and field athlete. My dad was a cross-country runner.
Oh, wow.
My mum says she just ran away from the boys. But, you know, sport was in our family. Saturday watching Big Daddy, wrestling, horse racing, you name it, we watched it. So when my primary school teacher recognised that talent in me, she was just awesome. And I didn't see it then. And then I was tackled by Croydon Harriers Club to come down and join. And it wasn't something my parents wanted me to do as such as a career, because it wasn't a thing, it was just a hobby then. And then I joined the club, and the rest is history. I've stayed with that club forever. I'm still a life member. I won't run for them though.
Oh, wonderful. And you started, I think you were about 8 or so when you started running, but you were 6 times England school champion, such kind of young, raw talent. So when you look back now, what was it that you loved so much about athletics and about the sport itself?
Well, I think I could run fast. I was good at something. I wasn't that bad at school. It was just sport in general, making new friends, coming together, aiming for that peak performance was just it for me, aiming for excellence and traveling and learning different cultures, the places I traveled to. And I guess this is why I got into the field of ED&I, because that's exactly what sport does. It brings people together. You learn about different people, their temperaments, their behaviours, the cultures, and I just loved it. I just loved athletics. I loved winning, of course, who doesn't? And I felt good about myself. And whenever I did compete, when I put that kit on, especially the Team GB kit, you had that sense of pride that you can't beat it. And I was always, obviously when I was at school as well, coming back to school, the praise you'd get, that lift and that sense of achievement, you just can't beat it.
I love that. It's very honest of you, almost it's lovely to get out there and win and to have that feedback and so on. I think often we think about the whole being with other people and the camaraderie, which are obviously important too. But I love that actually that is what drives so many, great athletes. That needs to be there, doesn't it, to commit to it. And how much of your life, I guess, growing up and teenage years was around, making sacrifices to compete in athletics? We hear so much, don't we, about teenage girls dropping out of sport. Was that ever a consideration for you?
Well, considering my parents didn't want me to do athletics, I was adamant I'll prove them wrong that I could do both. So I did study very hard at school. I worked hard and was able to still go training and compete at the weekends, and to prove them wrong that I could do both. And I can understand, that drop off, because there's a lot of peer pressure. And I always say it now, I can count my good friends on one hand, because those are the ones that understood. If they didn't see me for weeks on end and weekends when parties were happening and I couldn't go, they understood. And those who didn't, that thought it was about them, they dropped by the wayside. But my family, my support network kept me on the straight and narrow, in terms of, if they're your real friends, they will support you regardless of what you're doing. And that's how it was. I was headstrong. I knew what I wanted. I knew what I wanted to do, what I wanted to achieve. And my dad had all girls. So, he wasn't the kind of person to say, poor you. He really just toughened us all up and just, if you want something, girls, you go for it. Don't let anyone stand in your way. So poor him, he was the only male in the household, but a huge ally for me.
Like my husband, 3 daughters of me. And having run a fair few 400 metres myself over my younger years, but it's not the most pleasant of distances. So did you prefer it to the 200, or were you just better at it than you were the 200? You're shaking your head there.
Definitely not. I prefer the 200 any single day. I just happen to be better at the 400 metres. But in fact, once I started doing 400s, my 200s improved as well. And in fact, so did my 100 metres. So it's interesting how the body works and the training and your speed and your endurance. But yeah, you're so right. The 400 is not an easy event, and it took a while. I wouldn't say I perfected it at all. I still had a lot to do, and I ran out of time. But it's not an easy race. You really can just do something wrong. And I did that in Sydney, and it can just blow things out of the water, and it can go terribly wrong. So it's about pace, it's endurance, it's speed, it's a mix of everything. And even the training partners I trained with who did 800s dreaded doing 400s because the lactic acid is just not pleasant.
Wasn't it? And I guess I've known you a bit historically, and we've worked together with the Women's Sport Trust in the past too. And in my head, I always thought you were incredibly tall. And it's only in researching you that I realised you are tall. You are still tall, but you've got the most amazing long legs, which I hadn't really perceived in the past. If someone had asked me, I'd have said, "Oh yeah, Donna, she must be well over 6 foot," but that actually isn't the case.
It's not the case. And it's interesting, if I'm out at dinners or I'm in a boardroom and I'm sat down, everyone thinks, oh yeah, we're all the same height. I stand up and it's like, oh, you are tall. So I've got a tiny body and long legs, 36 inside leg. And
wow.
Yeah, you can imagine that was a nightmare growing up trying to find trousers to fit me.
And were long legs always an advantage for sprinting? I guess it's that maybe as the further you go, the more distance to get that cadence moving.
Yeah, it took my coach a while to really capitalise on my stride length. We worked really hard to lengthen it. So it was really supportive of the 400 metres. Not ideal for 100 metres. But then, of course, the great Usain Bolt came and blew that theory out of the window because he was just phenomenal. He had everything. And I just wished I had a little bit of his speed. I always would run out of track if I ran the 100 metres. But yeah, if you've got the right coach and you've got the right mechanics, absolutely it's possible. So I never saw it as a hindrance, just definitely more as an advantage that I can open up and just gather ground in a race.
Did you try 4 hurdles at all?
I did. That was the plan. That was always the plan. And then I broke my ankle. My first hurdles training session, I broke my ankle. Not many people know this. And then it was back to the drawing board, and I literally had to try and learn to run again. And it was difficult. It really was. So, I never had the opportunity, because I do believe that would have been my event.
Yeah, I was thinking, actually, I moved from 4 to 4 hurdles. I was never of a level anywhere near you're competing, but that was the natural progression. And I was thinking about your stride with that stride length. That could have been amazing in terms of, you wouldn't have even noticed the hurdles, would you, with your stride length?
That was the absolute plan. But, all these things the spanner gets thrown in the works, and that's it. You have to change direction, but deal with it the best you can.
Absolutely. And you took part in 4 Olympics, with your first in Atlanta in 1996. How old were you then?
I was 23.
23, a youngster. I put you on the spot there, didn't I? I could probably work that out myself.
Add it up.
And it was such a different time for British sport. So sadly, our worst performance at a Summer Games since 1952. We finished in 36th position with just 1 gold and only 15 medals overall. So what are your memories of that first Olympic Games?
Oh, so many. And we talk about it now because the 8 girls that I shared, 7 other girls I shared with, we're still friends today. And it was my first Games. And I always remember watching 84 in Los Angeles on TV. And that was the picture I had, that sea of colour and people having fun, as well as performing, of course. And then when I got there, I was just in awe of everything, being on the team with the likes of Linford Christie, Colin Jackson, Sally Gunn, all the greats I'd seen on TV. I was like, oh my goodness, this is just too much. I was overwhelmed by it all, but I just embraced it and enjoyed the experience. And then, of course, back then it was 4 rounds of the 400 metres, and I only got to the second round, but I did leave with a personal best. So I'd given it my all, my best shot. But the whole atmosphere and the dining room, the free McDonald's, which everyone always talks about, it was just a fantasy. It was just amazing. I loved every minute.
And when you started out competing, and I guess when you went to the Olympics in 96, at that highest level athletics, it was pre-national lottery funding and funding for athletes. So you worked full time, I believe, while you were training. How did you juggle that?
I did. I worked in the tourism industry, and in fact, leading up to Atlanta, I wanted to go part-time with my employer, but it wasn't a done thing then. So I had to make the choice of whether to leave and just try and focus on my athletics and get into the game. So I opted for the latter. I was devastated because I loved the tourism sector. It was really great fun, especially because I was working for the tourist board that my parents are from, that island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So I had that little personal connection with the job. So yeah, I focused everything. I didn't have any funds, only my savings to get me through. So it was pretty tough knowing that I couldn't go shopping and had to really count my pennies. But at the same time, I knew what my focus was to get to the games. So when I got to the games, it was great. I did that season. And then luckily, and I'm really thankful to this very day, that sponsorship came through, which was then Seaboard. And now it's EDF Energy to sponsor 5 athletes leading up to the 2000 Olympics from the Southeast. So they not only gave us funding, but they also offered the 5 of us a job. And I was the lucky one to get that part-time job. So I was able to do my athletics, exactly what I wanted, part-time, 20 hours a week, plus being able to do my athletics training. So it was a perfect mix. And I just wish organisations would do more of that.
And you stayed with them for quite some time, I believe, after that.
18 years. Gosh, scary.
And what difference did that make to you then as an athlete to have that funding? And we then had the National Lottery funding, we had UK Sport funded as a body. So for athletes generally, for yourself and others, what difference do you think that did make to people's lives?
Oh, a huge amount. It's one less thing to have to worry about. I guess I come from the ilk where there was no lottery funding. So being able to manage my money, it wasn't such a big deal. So when the lottery did come in, it was like, wow, this is brilliant. This is an extra thing that I don't need to think about. But in terms of the physio support, all of those services that are available to athletes are just really, really positive. And we all know being an athlete in itself, it's a job. It's not just a hobby. It's not just a nice thing to do. It is actually, it's a profession. So when you've got other things, not having to worry about that, it's just one less thing to think about. And it was a great thing to come into play.
And you mentioned Sydney earlier. So obviously you were there competing in one of the greatest races in Olympic history when Cathy Freeman won the 400 metre finals in Sydney 2000. I do remember it very, very well. So can you tell us about going into it? So the leading up into that event in terms of your preparation.
Yeah, that was an amazing year. I thought I was training pretty well, to be honest, but then my coach, being, rest his soul, quite an eccentric coach, really out there, sometimes some unorthodox training sessions that he'll give us. But I always said I was his guinea pig. He'd try all sorts with us, but he arranged for me to train with Cathy Freeman that summer because, of course, Cathy training in Australia would have been a huge burden on her, a lot of stress. So she removed herself to come and train here in the UK, which I didn't even know. But AO, my coach, was able to set that up. So I was able to train with her that summer. Oh. She needed a training partner here. My coach's approach was, and how Cathy's coach approach was to training 400 was very similar. And it just worked out well. So I joined her during the summer, and wow, that it was an eye-opener. I thought I was good, but I was not. I was way off. She was miles ahead of me in every single session, and it was a huge learning curve for me because it's so easy to get into your comfort zone when you're in front in your own training group and not quite pushing those boundaries. And to be world class, you need to push those boundaries, and that was the turning point for me.
And as you say, there was that huge pressure for her, wasn't there? I mean, she was the poster girl going into those games. And what was the atmosphere like on the night as an athlete down there on the track? I've watched the video back, ahead of talking to you. I watched it again on YouTube. It's extraordinary.
Oh, honestly, Sue, I watch it now and and get nervous every single time. It's ridiculous. But on the night, I wasn't. I so wasn't nervous. I remember as if you could hear a pin drop in the stadium. All I remember is the flashing lights. I didn't hear the crowd at all.
Wow.
I was so much, as we call it, in the zone, so much in the zone that I didn't realise I was in the Olympic final, hence why I didn't run the race I should have run. But anyway, that's a whole another episode, I think, Sue, in terms of, mental state and just not changing the plan. But I look back and I think, oh, wow, I was part of that. But I didn't realise it at the time. I just saw it as another 400 metres, which isn't a bad thing. It really isn't, because you can just get overwhelmed and taken over and nervous. But at the same time, I wasn't present. I wasn't present in the moment, and being that self-aware and what else was going on around me, that it felt as if I was just the only one on the track, which threw everything off completely for that race plan.
Because you were seventh, I think, coming around the bend, and then all of a sudden the home straight right up to fourth and almost third. It must have been so hard for you celebrating Cathy's success, and that was such a special moment in history. I say, watching the video, you're the first to go over and congratulate her too. So hard to be celebrating that and then to have just missed out on a medal yourself.
Absolutely. It was, in that split second, a roller coaster of emotions, to be honest. And there's that photo of both of us looking up at the screen as the results are coming up. And I knew she had won, and I knew what it meant to her and what we'd gone through on that journey through that summer. So 50% of me absolutely over the moon for her, and the other 50% gutted for myself as the results came up. So it was a bittersweet moment for me, without a doubt. And it was such a learning curve, and showing that resilience, and knowing that in a few days' time I had to pick myself up and get back on track for the relay for the girls, because it's not just about me anymore. So yeah, it was a bitter pill to swallow. I was gutted, but at the same time, breaking 50 seconds for the first time, being fourth best in the world, but it could have been a different result had I run the race I should have run.
And Cathy went on, at that race to become the first Aboriginal person to win gold at Olympics. So how much did that mean at the time for those, I guess, that listen to this that may not have been, listening and watching in 2000?
Oh, my goodness. I honestly don't know how she was able to get through that year and the years leading up to it, because it didn't just start in 2000. She's a huge role model for her community, the face of the Games as a whole. So, both sides, the Australians and the Aborigine community. And it was more than just winning the Olympic Games. It was a statement. It was something that you can achieve no matter what background you're from. Just the opportunity, it will make that difference. And she had the opportunity to be a great athlete, and she is and was. So there were so many messages that came out of that, the whole equality piece, equity. It was just amazing. And it's interesting, I didn't realise it at the time. I knew what it meant to her, but now working in the space of D&I, I really understand how big a deal it was, and those conversations that probably hadn't been had leading up to the Games, that collaboration between both communities. It changed the course of the perception of the Indigenous people.
And that has changed a lot, hasn't it? You think 22 years on, we have seen significant changes, but stimulated at that time through her activity. You went on to compete at Athens and Beijing, but in 2009, things changed for you with a health scare. Are you happy to talk about that and what happened there?
Absolutely. Yeah. More than happy to. It was a strange one, because although I went to 2008, I did step foot on the track, so I can't technically say I'm a four-time Olympian. I represented Team GB at 4 Games, I can say that. But that was tough for me to take, not even getting a chance to run in the heats. So I changed the course of what I was going to do next, and my coach and I sat down and I decided to do 400 metres indoors, which with these long legs is a big ask.
Those bends.
Oh my goodness, honestly, me and my bright ideas. But I needed that challenge. I needed that lift, something to work towards and not just go through the motions. And it certainly did that. I came away from the Europeans with a relay medal, and it put me in good stead for the outdoor season. And then, of course, I found the lump in my breast in May of 2009. But like most athletes, you're so body aware and you know when things aren't quite right, but you still go and, you know, go through the course and get things checked out. And I did just that. And the GP said, you know, regardless, it needs to be removed, and we'll send that off for a biopsy. So I had a lumpectomy, got it sent off, and yeah, lo and behold, it came back as early stages of breast cancer. So it was a curveball I did not see coming at all. No family history, of course, fit and well. I just did not see it coming whatsoever. So it was a huge blow, a real big blow for me. But I always say it, if it wasn't for sport and that whole mindset that I had, I probably wouldn't have come out the other end as I did.
And you were just 36, I believe, at the time.
Yeah.
And at the time, I only told your coach and your close family members. So had you intended to keep training if you could and competing? Was that your initial plan?
Absolutely. Again, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. My dad was very much, don't let anything stand in your way, just keep going. And my goal was to get to the World Championship. So I continued to train. I told my coach for obvious reasons and my close family, but that was it. I didn't, and everyone was just like, oh my gosh, you know, you're still going. And I'm like, yeah, I was still hanging in there. And it was tough because I'd obviously had the lumpectomy and was still competing and the agony I was in. So no one really knew the backstory of it. And then when the results came back, that was when I made the decision that I need to press pause on my athletics career and just really focus on my health and get well and just get back on the horse, as it were. So I didn't plan on coming out of retirement. But, you know, when you just feel I'm not done, I want to finish on my terms, not just because of the breast cancer. And then also the bigger message around body awareness and breast cancer awareness. I just felt I needed to do more as a Black woman as well, because in our culture, we don't talk about the C word that much. And more it's gotten better over the years. But if I could help save a life, I felt I needed to do something, despite my parents not wanting me to tell anyone else, keep it behind closed doors. But I was adamant that I needed to share my story. So that's why I came out of retirement in 2012, not only just to make the games, but to also tell that story as to why I was returning.
That's so powerful, isn't it? And you've been an ambassador for breast cancer now for well over a decade. So that's fascinating in terms of both you're using the platform for women generally, but for Black women that it's not so talked about. I hadn't realised that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, it's not just a women's disease either. People think it is just impacts women, and it is men get it as well. So, you know, we just need to spread that awareness, and early detection is just so important. And I do think having been an athlete, being body aware helped so much. If it's not right, you know more than anybody else, just keep banging that door down with your GP if they send you home. And it's just so important to just stay on top of it. But yeah, I just felt I needed to do something. I can't have gone through this journey and not help in some shape or form. And the only way I thought I could was to get involved with a charity who was doing great work already, and then also telling my story, because cancer doesn't discriminate, and that people will see me as an Olympian, a fit person, and how could this be? And it changed the narrative completely. It doesn't discriminate. Anyone can be impacted.
I'm going to move on to your kind of working career post your athletics career. But in 2017, you became the D&I Lead at UK Athletics. And many of us may think of athletics as being a fairly inclusive sport in terms of ethnicity, but also gender, disability. But what did you find needed to change there?
You're right. You hit the nail right on the head there, Sue. I always say athletics is probably the most diverse and inclusive sport, and most people can get a pair of trainers and just go out and run. But at the same time, they recognised they needed someone to come in and drive those messages through the organisation and get people thinking differently, and not just rest on our laurels as being the most diverse sport. We could lead the way in sport with this. So it was great that they recognised that. I was lucky enough to get the role. We did a huge amount in the organisation, just that whole awareness and understanding, what does D&I really mean to athletics? And there's still a lot of work to be done. You know, we're not the best. We still have a lot of things to do. but it was a great starting point, and they took that step forward. We were the first sport to have an LGBTQ plus network, the first to have an ethnically diverse network as well. And that's just bringing people together from any part of athletics, whether you're an athlete, an official, an employee, just coming together and just sharing those experiences to make the sport better.
And what did you learn from your time in that role that might be useful to others now in terms of shifting that diversity, especially as you've mentioned there for officials and volunteers? Because I think we think of athletics as very representative from a participation point of view, but it is about the workings, isn't it? The people that are working within the sport too.
Absolutely. I think the most important thing, and the first thing I started to do was just having those open and frank conversations. The power of conversation, you can't beat it. I spent a lot of time speaking to people, how they felt. Do they feel like they belong in athletics and not just being an official and measuring the jumps into the sandpit? Do they feel part of that athletics family? And, I'd like to think that I am approachable, that if something isn't quite right, then people can come to me and talk to me about it, and I'll do my best to put things right. But a huge turning curve was the George Floyd murder. And when we did the whole Let's Talk About Race series, that just blew my mind, because I thought I'm very much a person, rather than running away from the walls, let's go to the walls. And we'd never done anything like that before, where it was a open forum for anyone in the sport to come together and tell their truth. So creating that environment that people felt comfortable to do that, and it wouldn't go any further, but we just needed to listen as a sport. And it was just amazing. It was both emotional, it was enlightening, it was empowering. I just couldn't believe it. We ran 17 sessions, and in those sessions there were 10 to 15 people in each. It was just phenomenal. I thought we'd have 3 at the most. But again, being able to be heard. I think that's the key with any part of D&I. It's being heard, being valued of what people are saying, and then having action after.
And you moved on then to go to work at the Commonwealth Games at Birmingham 2022. So what was your role there? And also, how was Birmingham different to previous games in terms of ED&I?
So I started at Birmingham 2022 heading up their inclusion engagement team, and it was interesting because I came quite late to the party. Of course, Birmingham 2022 didn't have as much time as any other Commonwealth Games. Our time was really cut short. So my role came into play quite late. But when I did come in, they'd already set out their EDI priorities, and one of them was, their vision was for the games to be the most inclusive and accessible games ever. And that was almost music to my ears, because they recognised that that's so important. With Birmingham being so diverse, we had to capitalise on that as much as possible and really shine the light on Birmingham. So I'd say half of my job was done in terms of leadership recognised this is what we wanted to do. We just needed to deliver it. But it goes back to the power of conversation, connecting with communities. Community engagement sat within my remit, and so did safeguarding as well. And safeguarding, as we all know, is just so important in sport. It was the first of its kind to have this role in place. So we were the first games for many games of doing a lot of new firsts. New sports in play, more medals for women. Again, the whole focus on sustainability, social value. There were so many firsts that really encompassed D&I as a whole. And we also worked well together to drive those messages in no matter what we were delivering. But it was an interesting time. It really was.
It's fantastic to have been involved in something, you say, so groundbreaking. And moving on then, last week you were appointed, it's been announced, to be the new Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the Professional Cricketers Association. So can you tell us a little bit more about the PCA and the role it plays within cricket for those that might not know?
Yeah, so it's a membership looking after the players, both male and female players, and their welfare, giving them that support. So I guess I'm probably in a good position that I understand the athletes' needs. Although I've never been a cricketer, it's not about that. It's just about individuals and their needs and wants. And then the flip side of that, my work with D&I. So of course, cricket has gone through some turbulent times of late, talking about this topic, D&I. So having someone, it's the first of its kind as well in cricket, to help drive that and give that guidance and support and really galvanise that conversation, that some counties probably are having some difficulties with that. Players probably as well don't feel that they've had that support. So I'll be coming in. It's really very much focused on education. It's about educating and having those uncomfortable conversations where needed, rather than ignoring them and sweeping them under the carpet, because then they just come back twice as hard and bite you where you don't want to be bitten, basically. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting role. I think the fact that it's the first of its kind, I can make it my own and really drive it. But I've got huge support from the senior leadership, and they know the will is there, which is half the battle won. Just need to really engage with the players and understand what the issues are, what are the barriers, and also as the wider PCA as well, so I can have a better understanding and start driving that agenda.
I should have said congratulations, because it's a fantastic role where, you know, as you say, in a sport that needs some help and assistance here and now, and those players too. But it's not just about race, though, is it, in cricket? There's also the challenges to get a level playing field in terms of gender and class and disability. So will that come within that role as well? Absolutely.
And every protected characteristic, in fact. I think it's so easy when we talk about diversity, just talk about the ethnicity, but there's such a broader conversation. So that will be really, really interesting for me as well. And the dynamics coming from a multi-sport organisation with Birmingham 2022 and what we did there, and how we can keep that going through into cricket. Of course, we had the T20 cricket for women at Birmingham. So that was an eye-opener in itself. And so many spectators were saying, wow, I didn't know it was that great. So again, you know, the interest is there, but we just need to raise that, which is, of course, the work you've been doing for years, Sue, is to try and elevate women's sport as much as possible, because they deserve it.
And I loved at Birmingham the female officials, and there's signage to say that there was all female officials during the T20 games too. So it's great to see that spread, as you say, from the participants to those working in the sport too. So just as we close, you've obviously had a long career across sport. I just wonder, in terms of gender equality, what are those changes that you've seen during your career, and whether there are big issues that you feel still need to be addressed in terms of gender equality in sport?
Well, I always say, Sue, my aim is to make myself redundant, because if everything was equal and equitable, then you wouldn't need people like me in such roles. There is a lot of work to be done, but I always say, let's not end on a negative. Where we are now compared to 10 years ago, we've had probably a pigeon step forward. So it's going in the right direction, probably at snail's pace. I think the fundamental difference is the visibility. It has increased, but there's still much more. We really need to find that plateau where everything is just as equal as possible, where possible. And I know in terms of disability, the dynamics of setting up competitions can be quite logistically tough. However, having said that, for example, at Birmingham 2022, we had an integrated programme. So it's possible. Rather than focus on what's not possible, focus on what is possible. So I think the visibility has been it's improved considerably, but we still need more. And having the Lionesses win, I mean, that in itself, it shouldn't have taken that win for people to be talking about them. But I'll take that. I think, you know, they fully deserve all the accolades and the praise that they've received, but it's got to continue. It shouldn't just stop there. Even if they do badly in the future, still elevate them, because they're still great players.
Thanks again to Donna for taking the time to talk to me today, and we wish her well in the new role at the Professional Cricketers Association. Head over to fearlesswomen.co.uk to find out more about all of the incredible game changers I've spoken to for the podcast. If track and field athletics is your passion, then do go back and listen to previous episodes with the likes of Jess Ennis-Hill, Sarah Story, Denise Lewis, Tanny Gray-Thompson, Holly Bradshaw, Katarina Johnson-Thompson and Hannah Cockcroft. As well as listening to all the podcasts on the website, you can also find out more about The Collective, a free network for all women working in sport. You can sign up for the Fearless Women newsletter, which highlights the developments in women's sport. And there's more about my book, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport. Thank you once again to Sport England for backing the Game Changers through the National Lottery, and to Sam Walker, who does a great job as our executive producer. Finally, thank you to my brilliant colleague at Fearless Women, Kate Hannon. Do come and say hello on social media, where you'll find me on Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram at Sue Anstis. And if you have a couple of moments to leave a review or rating for the podcast, that would be great, as it really helps us reach new audiences with the stories of these incredible women. The Game Changers. Fearless Women in Sport.